something, you can nullify it, right? We know that these are laws that we have. If you have your delicious cholent on Shabbat and some milk falls in it, as long as the cholent is 60 times more of the milk, it's kosher. So he said, every time they cook a piece of meat, they have to measure to make sure that there are 60 times more water than meat. And this way they were able to provide a broth that more people would be able to benefit from and less people would be affected negatively. Now I bring that just because I was fascinated by it, because what do you see? You see Jews starving in the ghetto, they have access to food, but it's not just a question of, I'm going to eat now to satisfy my physical need. I'm going to eat now in order to serve Hashem. I'm going to serve Hashem even under such a situation. I'm going to give to the Almighty. I'm going to allow my neshama to have opportunity to give to. Let's take a few more questions that we saw over there. An interesting case came up in situations. A very fascinating case. A life and death type scenario. And I'd like everybody to think about it. Imagine that you have been chosen to be the Altenstadt, the elders in your particular ghetto. And the Germans give 5,000 white cards and they say, you decide who gets a white card. Whoever doesn't get a white card will be deported to Auschwitz. You know that whoever you give a white card to will be saved. Whoever doesn't get a white card is facing an almost certain death. Are you allowed to choose to whom you give these white cards? Because by giving a white card, are you sending somebody else to their death? Or can you say that, well, right now, it's as if we're all in a situation where death is imminent, and therefore we're just trying to save people from imminent death? It's a question that we can hear. Can you give such a white card? Seems to be the halacha is that as long as it was not specified who the Germans wanted, one can give 5,000 cards away to allow other Jews to escape. Whereas the halacha would be different if specific Jews were specified and you're substituting those Jews for somebody else. One cannot substitute. But when no one has been designated specifically, one can choose who you want to allow to escape. Now I bring that because I think it's fascinating to see the way a Jew can live in the most trying of circumstances. It's not enough just that we have 5,000 possibilities to allow 5,000 Jews to live. We can only let 5,000 Jews live if they're living properly, if they're living following the will of God. That's a nation. That's a nation unique to no other nation. At the Nuremberg trials in 1946, we know that many Nazis were given prison sentences. Many were hung, some were hung, some went free. But I'd like to read an account by a German engineer, Hermann Rabbi, who witnessed the massacre of the Jews of Dubno in the Ukraine. And this German engineer described what he saw as the Germans were massacring this group. And this is his testimony at the Nuremberg trials. Without crying or tears, these people undressed, stood in family groups together, kissed and said goodbye, and waited for a sign from another SS man who stood by the trench and also held a whip. During the quarter of an hour that I stood near the lorries, I heard no crying or begging for mercy. I watched one family of some 8 persons, a man and wife, both of about 50, with their children, about 1, 8, and 10 years old, as well as 2 grown-up daughters of 20 to 24, an old woman with snow-white hair, who held the 1-year-old child in her arm, singing to him and tickling him. The child chuckled with joy. The father and mother looked on with tears in their eyes. The father held a youngster of some 10 years by the hand and spoke quietly to him. The boy fought back his tears. The father pointed with his finger to heaven, stroked his head, and seemed to be explaining something to him. The SS man at the trench called out something to his comrade. The later detailed 20 persons and told them to go behind the mound of earth. The family of whom I spoke was among them. I remember exactly how a young woman pointed to herself and said, "I'm only 23." I went over and looked at the mound. People laying so closely packed that only heads could be seen. By my reckoning, there were about 1,000 people in this trench. The people went down a few steps which had been dug in the wall of the trench and scrambled over the heads of those who were lying there at the position that the SS man indicated. They lay down among the dead or wounded. Some stroked those who were still alive, speaking quietly words of comfort to them. Then I heard a succession of shots. This non-Jewish engineer was testifying to how Jews died. One could be cynical and say, "Oh, that looks like sheep to the slaughter." Or one could be honest and say, "No, it looks like neshamot reacting to Hashem." Living to comfort, living to give, living to shield at the last moment of one's life by families who weren't trained in the art of violence or war. Accounts of the Russian army camps where the same things would happen. You see Russian soldiers, men trained in the art of warfare, hardened soldiers, crying and screaming and fighting to get out, pushing and killing. Yet Jews giving and embracing and trying to shield others from the horror, even at the last moment. That's spiritual heroism. And God brings us to these situations because He understands the Jew is so important. Our job as a Jewish nation is to teach the world that life is about love, that life is about giving. If we can't teach the world that, there's no purpose for existence. We have to be that light. But if we're going to give up that job, and if we're going to become like the other nations, and if we forget who we are, God will bring the anti-Semite. He'll bring it to remind us of who we are. And He'll squeeze us. But by squeezing us, the real Jew comes out. And I dare say that's the literature we find right now of the resistance in the Holocaust. You have to look. It's difficult to find acts of physical resistance. It was hard. How can you resist when you have families and old people with you? But that's not real resistance. Real resistance is being a spiritual partisan, looking to serve God even in the most drastic situation. That's what anti-Semitism can bring out. That's certainly what the Holocaust brought out. It brought us who we are as a nation. It defined us as a nation. And our legacy to that event is to live like such a nation. Thank you for listening.